The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. Big Amazon news. So Amazon is building a second headquarters. This project has been called HQ2. Boston was at one point being considered or wanted to be considered. I guess I actually don't know, Pat, to what extent Amazon was considering Boston and to what extent Boston was lobbying Amazon. But Boston was in the running, at least in some sense, I think is fair to say.
Yeah, we were considering it. I don't know if we were going to offer them the same lucrative tax breaks that other cities were going to offer them, but we had the area of the city designated for them, and we were flirting with the idea for sure.
Yeah, it was a very, very flirtatious consideration, I think is fair to say. In any case, they have decided now that they were going to take HQ2 and split it into two different parts, I guess we would say. One of them is going to be in New York City. The other is going to be in Arlington, Virginia. And there was a promised $5 billion of investment and 50,000 employees that would come with this. The two cities are going to split that. Now, is $2.5 billion a lot for New York City? Like, I should look up, what's the New York City yearly budget? Let's see if I can find that. $88 billion. Okay, so $2.5 billion is not nothing, but it's also not... I mean, I guess it's 2.5%. Okay, 2.5% actually for a city that big is quite a bit. All right, so that is actually quite a bit. And for Arlington, Virginia, obviously it's even bigger. So it's going to be those two cities, and a lot of other cities are upset about this. And I am really kind of mixed. I mean, so there's the analysis of Amazon as a company and how they treat workers, how they impact small businesses. There's that argument of the entire thing, and we can have that argument, and it's a perfectly fair argument. The other side is, does a company like Amazon dropping 25,000 employees, as well as their housing needs, as well as their commuting vehicles, either if they're driving themselves or using public transit, that has an impact on the city. And there are people, Pat, who argue like, this is just bad. This is bad in terms of how it will affect the lives of everybody else who's living in the cities. It'll drive up the prices of both rent and real estate prices. It'll clog streets. It'll fill subway cars. And the idea that the benefit to the city of the $2.5 billion is outweighed by, they're sort of socializing the costs among all the people that now have to deal with an additional 25,000 people commuting and driving up prices for housing and rent. And they don't really get the benefits.
Do you suspect that maybe this was all just one big ploy by Amazon and Jeff Bezos? Because they did market it as they were looking at one city, trying to find the perfect match for them and all their needs. And then after getting all these offers of tax breaks and loopholes, they decide to split their second headquarters between two cities. It just doesn't sit right with me.
I don't think that the marketing ploy would have been, I don't think there's any financial advantage to taking one big tax break and dividing it into two smaller tax breaks. If it was a ploy, it was sort of to get cities competing in some way and to maybe even curry favor with, I read an interesting article about Bezos getting more and more involved politically. And it also could have been a way for him to start making political inroads in a lot of cities and states that would be courting him. So I think it could have been a ploy, but I don't think the ploy would have been for the tax break, because they would have one tax break or two smaller ones. It's all kind of the same in the end. I think the ploy would have been more sort of PR and political networking sort of thing.
Yes. Good to go.
All right. Very good. Okay. Let's talk about, there's a situation that happened at a school, Maywood High School, where a music teacher was arrested after a video went viral of them being called a racial epithet by a 14-year-old student and getting a basketball thrown at them by that student. And the teacher punched the 14-year-old. This happened Friday at Maywood Academy High School. And 64-year-old teacher Marston Riley, who is black, was arrested on suspicion of child abuse. He is being investigated, and meanwhile, more than $61,000 have already been donated to the teacher. And I guess, Pat, the basis for the donations is, yes, he punched a kid, but the kid used a racial epithet and threw a basketball at him. So in some way, it was either justifiable or self-defense.
I think it's partially that. I think other people want to see this sort of thing happen more often, right? go back to the days where corporal punishment was inflicted on students who disobeyed, and people are longing for that sense of returning to something like that, maybe just as a retribution for what the kid did.
And what we've learned, or at least what has been asserted since this one video went viral, is that the teacher rather, had been attacked physically and verbally in the past. And a lot of people saying he's a great guy. We really like him as a teacher. This was a confrontation where a student was being aggressive, and that it was in some sense a form of self-defense. Although it's hard to argue that it's self-defense when an unarmed kid, as far as we know unarmed, says a racist word and throws a basketball at you. Is a punch equal force? So even if you want to make a self-defense argument, is a punch equal force? I think it's a hard case to make.
Yeah, no, the teacher would get all the sympathy in the world if it was just left at him being called a racial slur and getting a basketball thrown at him. I think just about everyone would come to his side on that, but you have to be able to apply equal force to the force being thrown at you. And just one basketball getting hit by it isn't going to do any damage. I think maybe he just got, he got pushed to the brink and wanted to make up for what happened to him, and this is what he did. But at the end of the day, you have a 60-something-year-old man fighting a 14-year-old boy. There's just no excuse for that, regardless of who started the fight. I think he should be able to do him if he's under attack, but he should not be throwing punches like how he did.
So then the question becomes, if you're donating to this guy's GoFundMe account, are you defending someone who punched a 14-year-old? Is that effectively what you're doing? And I guess in a sense it is, but I guess you could be contributing because you think that the guy is getting sort of an unfair shake, and that this is not a highly compensated person, but someone who's teaching at a high school and doesn't deserve that. I just don't know. The idea of donating to someone who punched a kid seems weird, but at the same time, you could say, well, I sympathize with him because he's been the victim of these racial and physical attacks for a while, but it's just hard to get behind donating to someone who punched a kid.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if the person retaliated against someone who was of equal age or just at least 18, I would feel some sympathy for the guy, and I could even get behind him. But once you talk about someone being underage, you lose me there. And I wonder what the consequences should be. Like, should the teacher be fired? I would say that he should be. There's no excuse for acting in that capacity. And the student should probably be suspended for a long period of time and have to go through some sort of counseling in order to get back into school.
So if the student had punched the teacher in the face and then the teacher punched the student, would you feel completely differently about this?
If the student punched him once, I don't think that would be justification necessarily for the teacher to fight back. But if the student was on top of him and the teacher was in fear of his own safety and the attack continued, then yeah, he would be perfectly justified in fighting back. You always have the right to self-defense there. But I think he just went way overboard, and that self-defense argument doesn't stand.
Check out some articles on this and send me your thoughts. I do want to hear from people in the audience about it. Let's talk about 6 things you can do to combat climate change. And these are things... The issue of climate change is that there is a sort of tragedy of the commons situation, in that individually we can't really do that much to change the trajectory of what is happening to the environment. And yet, if we all did it, it would make a big difference. So here are 6 things that everybody can just do, which will immediately have a positive impact, although understandably it won't be that big unless a lot of people do them. Number 1, waste less food. We've talked about this before. So much food is wasted at multiple different levels of food harvesting and production. Waste less food, figure out ways not to have to throw food out. I know that I have weeks where I don't waste any food, and I have weeks where leftovers get a little bit ripe, and it's I don't like it. So that's something everybody can do. Number 2, I've talked about this one. Eat less factory farmed red meat specifically. I don't think that one really comes as a surprise when you consider both the impact on health, but also the impact on the environment of factory farmed red meat. Makes perfect sense. Consume less energy and water. This is kind of a funny thing. So since I moved, I've lived in condos for a while, and water usage has been paid through the condo fee for a very long time. And now at my new condo, I'm actually involved in the payment of the water bill. So even though I'm paying for it through my condo fee and I'm not really paying for what I use, I'm just paying sort of a set amount, and the entire condo shares the amount. Now that it's a smaller condo, I have become much more aware of how much water costs, and I find myself being much more mindful with water. Not that I ever wasted water, but I find myself being much more mindful with it. We can all do this. We can all make decisions about heat and air conditioning and water use to reduce our footprint. Number 4, call and meet with representatives, and this applies to more than just climate issues. But yes, encourage your representatives to do the right things. If it's national representatives, it can be related to the Paris Climate Accords. If it's the state, it can be making the state take steps above and beyond what the federal government is doing. You can actually do a lot at the city and state level on this issue. 5, open a dialogue and find common ground with people who don't agree with you, whether they think that environmental regulations are job killers or that climate change is a hoax. And this always gets very complex because, as we know, giving people facts doesn't always, or very often doesn't, change their minds about what's going on or what should happen. So I think that that's a good tip, although it can be hard to put into practice. And lastly, volunteer. And this could be anything from working to clean up natural resources to all sorts of other volunteering that can be done. It's a nice little list, Pat, but at the same time, I think most people still see those things and say, that's fine, I can do it and I'll feel good about myself. But unless everybody does it, we're screwed when it comes to the climate.
Yeah, some of these things on the list come across as a little bit more pie in the sky than others. I don't think most people are going to go out there and volunteer in order to combat climate change or even call their representatives, because most people just aren't that politically involved. But hey, look at me. I'm a vegan who walks to work, who bike rides, who doesn't have a car, who, when I do have to get around longer distances, uses public transportation. It could be fair to say that I have the smallest carbon footprint of anyone that you know, David. Is that fair?
The amount of plastic coffee containers that you're going through on a weekly basis, I think, undoes a lot of that stuff that you mentioned.
I think we have proof against this. See, look, take a look at this. This is a mug I have here. And some people do give me heat, though, because I'm willing to eat almonds. I'm willing to eat soy. And apparently those plants do consume a lot of water. But as compared to animal products, I don't think it stacks up that high.
Listen, I think that you're wearing an inordinate amount of cotton. Do you know how many small animals die as a result of the water that leaves their environment because cotton requires so much water consumption? You should only be wearing synthetic clothing. Unfortunately, the problem with that is then it goes into a landfill and doesn't degrade. So I guess that's a problem too. But cotton is really bad.
We were close to adding a 7th thing to that list before you started talking about synthetic fibers. But yeah, I'm just going to wear polyester from now on. I know it doesn't breathe as well as some of the other fabrics out there, but I already can't wear leather, and I can't wear down, and I can't wear fur. So my options are limited here. Polyester from now on.
There's no feathers in that vest you're wearing?
No.
Oh, okay. All right, well, why would I even bring that up? Why would I think that there's feathers in that thing? That's crazy. All right, that's it for today. Brand new week of shows next week. Thank you to all of our new members and everybody who's going to be with us, hopefully, up to, through, and including the 2020 presidential election, which is going to get going much earlier than many of us imagine or might like. We will talk about that and much more next week.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.